The air in the logistics depot was a heavy, stagnant soup of industrial odors. It smelled of spilled diesel, stale coffee grounds left to calcify in cheap plastic mugs, and the fine, chalky dust kicked up by forklift tires. The ceiling lights, long, buzzing fluorescent tubes, cast a sickly yellowish pallor over everything, making the stacked crates and the tired faces of the men working inventory look uniformly jaundiced and weary. Cabo Lara Silva was, officially, a member of the base support staff, assigned to maintenance and cleaning duties. Unofficially, she was the ghost in the machine, the necessary inconvenience that kept the filth of military life from grinding the base to a complete halt. She was pushing a heavy-duty industrial cleaning cart, stainless steel, scarred, perpetually rattling, and her movements possessed a silent, rhythmic efficiency that belied the simplicity of her task. Her uniform was faded woodland camouflage, washed so many times the original greens and browns had softened into an indistinct, muted gray. It hung loosely on her frame, the only discernible tailoring being the way the sleeves were perpetually rolled tight above her elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and crisscrossed with old silver-white scars. She didn't wear a helmet or body armor. Her only tool at this moment was the mop, a heavy cotton head secured to a thick wooden handle, slick from constant use. Silva had stopped just outside the caged-off section marked Supply and Distribution Level 3, waiting for her moment. The floor she was attempting to sanitize, the main corridor leading to the infirmary, was currently slick with a mixture of spilled medical waste and hydraulic fluid from a leaking generator. The standard-issue cleaner wasn't touching it. She needed the solvent, a specific, specialized industrial degreaser kept behind the wire. Inside the cage, Sergeant First Class Elias Huntington reigned. Huntington was logistics, a world away from the grit and immediacy of frontline operations. He was immaculate. His uniform was starched to an aggressive stiffness that looked painful. His boots gleamed with a deep synthetic shine that suggested floor polish rather than careful spit shining, and he wore a faint, cloying scent of cheap citrus aftershave that fought disastrously with the smell of the depot. He was seated behind a reinforced steel desk, feet propped up, pretending to scrutinize a ledger while actually scrolling through his phone. The fluorescent buzz above him seemed to intensify, mocking the silence. Silva pushed the cart forward, the wheels squeaking a high-pitched, insistent complaint against the concrete floor. She stopped directly in front of the waist-high counter, her posture straight, eyes focused on a point just over Huntington's left shoulder. She didn't speak immediately, letting the silence, a commodity Huntington clearly despised, do the initial work. Huntington didn't look up. His thumb continued its slow, measured swipe across the screen. "Morning, Sergeant," Silva said, her voice low, raspy, completely devoid of inflection. It was the voice of someone who understood that emotion was a waste of breath. Huntington sighed, a dramatic, performative exhalation that inflated his chest beneath the stiff camouflage blouse. He kept his eyes fixed on the screen for 3 agonizingly slow seconds, then dropped the phone onto the desk with a sharp clack. He looked up at her, and the contempt in his eyes was almost palpable, a physical wave of dismissiveness. "What is it, Cabo?" he drawled, heavily emphasizing her low rank. "Can't you see I'm busy integrating the Q4 supply audit? This isn't the mess hall. Keep the janitorial traffic clear." Silva didn't flinch. "I require the Type C solvent, Sergeant. 3 liters. The infirmary corridor. Standard issue won't break down the residue. It's becoming a slip hazard." Huntington leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "Type C? Do you know what Type C is, Cabo? It's restricted, hazardous materials classification. It requires 3 signatures, a Level 4 requisition form, and authorization from the maintenance chief." "I have the requisition," Silva stated, reaching into the breast pocket of her uniform. She produced a tightly folded piece of paper, the creases worn almost white. Huntington didn't take it. He just waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, a form. How cute. Look, I don't care if you have the general's signature, Cabo. I'm telling you, Type C is off limits. You are support staff. You are not authorized to handle specialized chemicals. Go back and use the bleach. That's what we pay laundry staff for, isn't it? The insult wasn't just in the refusal. It was in the deliberate mischaracterization of her duties and the implied worthlessness of her presence. Laundry staff. Silva's gaze hardened infinitesimally, the muscles in her jaw tightening. She looked down at the mop handle, her knuckles whitening slightly as she gripped the wood. The silence stretched, becoming thick and volatile, punctuated only by the distant clank of metal and the endless whining hum of the lights. "Sergeant," Silva persisted, her voice dropping another register, becoming dangerously quiet. "The residue is corrosive. It's tracking into sterile zones. If a surgeon slips—" "I don't care about your flaws, Grunt," Huntington snapped, his voice rising, irritation bubbling over into arrogance. He slapped the desk. "You are not an operations officer. You are a floor sweeper. You take what you're given, and you move. Now take your dirty cart and your useless paper and get out of my sight before I log a disruption report. You're just a nurse. Move!" The word nurse was spat out, a crude dismissal of any possible specialized skill she might possess, equating her necessary labor with the lowest rungs of respect. Silva stood absolutely still. She looked at Huntington, and in that protracted moment, time seemed to slow, the depot noise receding into a dull background throb. Her eyes, usually obscured by the constant physical weariness of her work, focused intensely. The color was a deep, unsettling shade of burnt umber. This level of disrespect, this petty tyranny enforced by a man who had never seen action more intense than a quarterly audit, was a familiar sting. But today, the sting brought with it a different sensation, a cold, mechanical calculation, the sound of ancient gears grinding back into motion. She didn't argue. She simply stared. Huntington, emboldened by her silence, stood up, leaning over the counter, puffing out his chest. "Did you hear me, Cabo? I said move. Go polish something." As Huntington finished his petty edict, Silva's gaze dropped briefly to her own hands, resting on the mop handle. It wasn't the handle she saw. It was the rough texture of the splintered wood. Yes, but beneath that, the sight triggered a specific, deeply buried memory, the texture of the stock of a Polish AKM, wet with rain and someone else's blood, 18 years ago, on a frozen mountain pass she was never meant to survive. Paktika Province, Afghanistan, 2010. The Silent Mission. The silence was the worst part. It wasn't natural silence, the quiet of the high desert. It was the suffocating, engineered quiet of extreme pressure. Ilara, then Lieutenant Silva, a foreign attachment specializing in explosive ordnance and asymmetric warfare, seconded to a highly classified coalition task force, felt the sand grate between her molars with every labored breath. The air at 9,000 feet was thin, biting cold even in the early morning, and tasted metallic, like licking a dead battery. Her gear weighed 85 pounds. Every ounce of it was necessary, the Scar H resting heavy against her chest, the 6 extra magazines taped together for quick transition, the thermal optic monocular dragging slightly on her helmet, and the specialized demolition pack cinched tight against the small of her back. The physical weight was nothing compared to the psychic weight of the mission. Retrieve or destroy the high-value target, HVT, and ensure zero collateral damage. She was the third element in the stack, moving through a narrow, dry wadi that snaked up toward the target compound, a mud-brick fortress clinging precariously to the mountain face. Ahead of her was Sergeant Kowalski, her partner and unofficial older brother, a man whose sheer bulk was dwarfed by his tactical precision. Behind her was Specialist Davies, the team medic, breathing hard, trying to keep pace. They moved at a pace known only to operators, agonizingly slow, each step tested, the body held in perpetual tension, coiled and ready to explode into violence. Kowalski stopped, raising a gloved fist. "Halt!" Silva lowered herself instantly, settling the Scar's muzzle toward the ground, her chest heaving against the ceramic plates of her carrier. She waited, watching Kowalski use the magnified scope on his rifle to scan the path ahead. The sun hadn't crested the ridge yet, leaving the valley floor bathed in an eerie, deep blue light. Kowalski tapped his helmet twice, meaning clear to proceed. Silva pushed off the ground, the fine silt instantly coating her knees. She took 4 more silent steps. Then the world ended. There was no distinct noise, not at first. The sound of the blast was so immense, so localized and all-consuming, that it felt less like an explosion and more like the immediate, catastrophic rupture of the atmosphere. It was a pressure wave, a crushing fist slamming into her chest plate, knocking the breath clean out of her lungs. A blinding, impossible white light erupted where Kowalski had stood. For a split second, Silva felt weightless, lifted and hurled backward onto the rocky embankment. Then came the sounds. The dull thud of her head hitting a rock despite the helmet, the agonizing crack of her shoulder joints absorbing the impact, and the high-pitched, insistent electronic whine that instantly rendered her temporarily deaf. When the dust, rock, and fragments of metal began to rain down, a brief, terrifying shower, Silva found herself lying prone, fighting a blinding disorientation. She couldn't hear. All she felt was a tremendous roaring vibration in her skull, the pressure attempting to force her eyeballs out of their sockets. The smell was the first thing to return clearly. Acrid, thick, the unforgettable scent of burned C4 and newly disturbed earth. She instinctively rolled, drawing her sidearm, eyes scanning the smoke. Kowalski. He was gone. Where he had been, there was now a deep, bowl-shaped crater, smoking darkly. His leg armor and boot were lying 20 feet away, a grisly, disconnected piece of kit. The rest of him, the man, the personality, the voice, had been atomized by the sophisticated, deeply buried IED. Panic was a luxury Silva had long ago discarded. Under pressure, she became a machine of pure, surgical reaction. Threat assessment. The explosion was the tripwire. The compound would now be alerted. They had maybe 30 seconds before the heavy weapons fire started. Silva pushed herself onto her knees, spitting blood and grit. She used her left hand to steady herself, finding that her right arm was throbbing with a sickening, grinding pain, dislocated shoulder, possibly fractured humerus. It didn't matter. She had to move. She glanced back. Davies, the medic, was tangled in his own radio wires, stunned, a slow trickle of blood staining the side of his helmet. He was breathing, but unresponsive. She forced her good hand to grip the Scar H, dragging it closer. The ringing in her ears was so intense she couldn't hear the bolt cycle, but she visually confirmed the chamber was clear. "Davies! Status!" she roared, the sound swallowed by the ringing. She pointed to her ears and gave the hand sign for mute. Davies blinked slowly, pointing feebly toward his chest. Ribs. Suddenly, the mountain ridge erupted, not with single shots, but with the wet, tearing sound of a Russian PKM machine gun, a relentless, unforgiving stream of 7.62mm rounds tearing up the ground where they lay. Silva grabbed Davies' collar, dragging him backward into the minimal cover provided by a large granite boulder. The weight of his unconscious body, combined with her injured arm, sent a spike of agonizing pain through her right side. But she locked her jaw and pulled. No time for casualty evacuation protocols. They were pinned, the only viable route forward, now a pulverized kill zone. She checked her Scar H's optic. It was cracked, useless. She tossed it aside, relying on the iron sights. She didn't have line of sight on the PKM nest, which was strategically located high up near the fortress walls, offering interlocking fields of fire. "Kowalski is dead!" she yelled at Davies, knowing he couldn't hear but needing the verbal confirmation to cement the reality. "We're extracting! Get a tourniquet on your damn leg!" Davies, finally shaking off the worst of the concussion, nodded vaguely. He was too injured to carry his own weight. Silva pulled a thermite charge from her kit, a small, highly specialized device designed to melt through steel fortifications. She had planned to use it on the HVT's reinforced panic room. Now it had a different purpose. She had to create a distraction, a momentary shield, a localized area of total chaos to allow them to break the engagement and reverse course down the wadi. With her left hand, she fumbled the safety pin, the metal cold and slick with her own sweat. The machine gun fire hammered the rock inches from her head, sending splinters of granite flying. She smelled the iron in the air, the smell of hot, spent brass. She set the timer for 4 seconds, a terrifyingly short window, and hurled the charge toward the base of the machine gun nest, throwing it with a desperate, untrained heave from her left shoulder. She didn't wait to see the results. She grabbed Davies, wrapped his arm across her shoulders, and forced herself into a painful, crouched sprint, staggering back the way they had come. The thermite hit. The explosion was less dramatic than the IED, but the blinding heat and chemical reaction instantly consumed the firing position. A plume of brilliant, toxic, green-white smoke erupted, momentarily blocking the enemy's vision. It was enough. They stumbled 40 meters, Silva navigating the uneven ground with the unnatural, lurching gait of a person carrying too much weight while fighting intense physical agony. Every jarring step felt like a new fracture in her shoulder. They needed to reach the rally point, 2 kilometers down the canyon, where a specialized helicopter, a Pavehawk modified for low-signature retrieval, was scheduled to perform a fast exfil. As they cleared the initial kill zone, the secondary wave of enemy fire began. AK-47s, inaccurate but numerous, tearing the air around them. Silva dropped Davies behind a rock formation that offered slightly better cover. She reached for the radio. Her communications officer was dead. The primary comms were blown. She pulled out the secondary short-range satellite burst transmitter, the size of a cigarette pack, and keyed the emergency code. Code Alpha. Personnel down. Extraction immediate. Zulu 4 coordinates. The transmission was high risk, unencrypted and painfully short. If the enemy had competent signals intelligence, they would know exactly where she was headed. She turned back to Davies. He was unconscious again, his helmet fallen off, revealing a deep gash on his temple. She looked at her rifle, 3 magazines left. She looked at the mountain. The enemy was descending, moving fast to capitalize on their confusion. The thought occurred, briefly, to abandon Davies. The mission was compromised. Survival dictated retreat. The thought was instantly dismissed, vaporized by a different, deeper code, the one etched into the marrow of every soldier who had ever served with a true elite unit. You don't leave the living. You don't leave the dead. She dragged Davies another 30 meters, stopping when she realized she couldn't maintain the pace and the firefight simultaneously. She wedged him securely behind an outcropping. She took aim, sighting down the iron notches of her scar. She aimed for movement, for muzzle flashes, for the brief, telltale puffs of dust kicked up by enemy boots. The exchange lasted 20 minutes, 20 minutes of pure, agonizing attrition. She fired in short, controlled bursts, utilizing the terrain, forcing the enemy to believe there was still a fully functional fire team holding the line. Her right arm, despite the injury, continued to pull the trigger with reflexive, muscle memory efficiency. The recoil, a searing burn from shoulder to fingertip. She ran dry on ammunition. Silence. The enemy hesitated, recognizing the sudden cessation of return fire. Silva waited, her breathing shallow, the taste of copper and dust filling her mouth. She could hear them scrambling on the rocks above, trying to flank her position. She had one last tool, the frag grenades. She pulled the pins on 2 fragmentation grenades, holding the spoons tight, counting the seconds in her head until the perfect moment for the fuse delay. 3 seconds. This gave the enemy no time to react. She stood up abruptly, exposing herself to the ridgeline, and hurled the first grenade high, aimed at the closest flanking movement. She immediately ducked back down, the explosion instantaneous, followed by screams. She tossed the second grenade lower toward the main approach. Another flash, more dust. The precious time gained, perhaps 60 seconds of disorganization. She turned to Davies. He was stirring, murmuring incoherently. "Extraction," she whispered, her voice raw. "Now, damn it!" She didn't carry him this time. She physically dragged him, using her good left arm hooked under his armpit. pulling him across the sharp, uneven landscape, ignoring the sound of tearing clothing and her own strained muscles. They finally reached the rally point, just as the pave hawk, flying nap of the earth, roared over the ridge, the twin rotor wash blasting dust and debris around them. Silver threw Davies onto the ramp, climbed in after him, and collapsed against the metal floor, the adrenaline finally receding, leaving behind a vast, hollow exhaustion. She looked back at the canyon mouth, now shrouded in dust and the remnants of the fight. She was the only one who climbed onto the bird under her own power. For that action, maintaining position under catastrophic loss, utilizing specialized ordnance to break contact, and successfully extracting a critically wounded comrade while fighting a flanking enemy force single-handedly for 20 minutes with a broken arm. She was awarded the Polish Krzyż Waleczny, Cross of Valor, 2 bronze stars, one with V for valor, and a secondary Purple Heart for the head trauma and shattered shoulder. She never served in the field again. The internal damage, the concussive trauma, the ringing deafness that occasionally returned, the constant tremor in her right hand, forced her into a medical discharge. She chose to stay within the military structure, taking the lowest available rank and assignment, needing the rhythm and the walls to keep the outside world at bay. She became Cabo Silva, the cleaner, the silent ghost. To the logistics depot, present day, the image of the Afghan grit, the burning cordite, and the sharp agony of her broken arm snapped back violently to the present moment. The pain wasn't real, but the residual memory made her eyes swim momentarily. Cabo Silva stood there, her hands gripping the mop handle, looking past the inflated arrogance of Sergeant Huntington. Huntington, mistaking her pause for submission, pushed his victory. You know, maybe if you spent less time loafing and more time polishing those floors with elbow grease, you wouldn't need my specialized chemicals, he sneered, leaning even further across the counter, invading her personal space. You're a failure, Cabo, a glorified janitor. Now turn around and get that filthy cart out of my sight. Move! The word hung in the air, heavy with unwarranted authority. It was precisely at this volatile, razor-thin edge of confrontation that the atmosphere of the depot shifted entirely. The change wasn't loud. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible drop in the ambient noise, a collective holding of breath among the few inventory workers scattered near the high shelves. A figure entered the supply room through the main bay doors. He didn't stride. He flowed. Every muscle movement was efficient, precise, radiating a level of focused intensity that silenced the low hum of the machinery. He was tall, built with the dense, functional musculature of a professional predator. His uniform was an older generation multicam, faded in a different, more professional manner than Silver's, worn by wind, dust, and sustained intentional abrasion, not cheap laundry cycles. He wore no rank insignia visible on his shoulders or collar, but the custom-fitted, ballistic-rated combat helmet held loosely in the crook of his arm, and the configuration of the high-end communications gear strapped to his plate carrier spoke volumes. This was Master Chief Thorne, call sign Spectre, an unnamed entity from the JSOC community, moving through the facility with the untouchable authority of someone who signed his own deployment orders. He was accompanied by 2 operators, equally silent, equally lethal, who took up unobtrusive flanking positions at the entry, scanning the ceiling vents and exits, ignoring the human occupants. Thorne was carrying his primary weapon, a heavily customized short-barreled LMT MRPS, fitted with a suppressor and several $1,000s worth of glass, held securely across his chest by a single-point sling. It was a rifle designed for surgical violence, treated with the meticulous care reserved for sacred objects. Thorne ignored Huntington entirely. He moved directly to the logistics counter, his eyes passing over the sergeant as if he were a particularly irritating piece of furniture. Huntington, sensing authority, straightened up, visibly preening. He wasn't accustomed to dealing with Tier 1 assets, and he recognized the opportunity for a performance. "Sir, can I help you?" "Sergeant Huntington, Logistics. Are you processing an extraction manifest?" I need proper clearance for any high-value assets leaving the area. Thorne stopped 3 feet from the counter, his eyes fixed only on Cabo Silva. He took in the faded uniform, the posture that was rigidly straight despite the slouching task, the way her left hand still gripped the mop handle with a soldier's unnatural tension. His gaze lowered, resting briefly on her combat boots. Old, well-maintained, laces tied in a specific, almost arcane knot that was taught only in the deepest echelons of special operations training. He saw the janitor, but he saw the soldier. Huntington, mistaking Thorne's focus on the janitor as a distraction, tried to regain control. "Apologies, Master Chief," Huntington said, his voice now oily with forced respect. "This Cabo here is disrupting my work. I was just instructing her to clear her supplies and move on. Base maintenance issues, you understand." Thorne remained silent. He reached out a hand, not toward Huntington, but toward Silva. Silva, still locked in a silent staring match with Huntington, didn't move her eyes, but she subtly adjusted her grip on the mop. "Your name, Corporal?" Thorne's voice was a low rumble, controlled and steady. It held no authority but demanded absolute attention. "Cabo Silva," she replied, the rasp in her voice echoing off the metal shelves. Thorne nodded, his eyes momentarily flicking to the faded collar of her uniform, settling on the left side, where the fabric met her neck. He was looking for something infinitesimal, almost hidden. Silva had never been one for ostentatious displays of past achievements. Her service ribbons were stored in a lockbox off base. Her highest decorations were physically manifested in the tiniest, most obscure way possible, an emergency ID tag, designed for specialized field deployments, permanently secured to the inside of her collar using heavy-duty stitching. Only those who knew what they were looking for would ever spot it. Thorne's eyes narrowed slightly. He saw the corner of the polished metal peeking out from beneath the collar seam. He stepped forward, his massive frame utterly eclipsing the now pale Sergeant Huntington. "Sergeant Huntington," Thorne said, his voice still low, but carrying a sudden, dangerous edge of steel. "Step back, 5 feet. Now." The sheer force of the Master Chief's presence broke Huntington's composure. The sergeant stammered, his face blanching, realizing this was not a request. He stumbled back 2 steps, his immaculate boots scuffing the concrete. Thorne gently, almost reverently, reached out and touched the collar of Silva's uniform, using 2 fingers to lightly lift the fabric, just enough to expose the tag. He didn't read the name or the service number. He read the etchings around the border. The military ID tags were customized for their unit. They didn't just list identifying information, they listed the highest combat decorations, engraved in miniature. Thorne's gaze fixed on the tag. He inhaled slowly, the air of the depot seeming to thicken around him. He lifted his head, his eyes meeting Silva's, and in that moment, there was a flash of mutual recognition, not of rank, but of shared crucible. "Ilara Silva," Thorne stated, his voice now projecting, filling the entire depot, silencing the distant machinery. He was not reciting a roster, he was announcing a lineage. "Former lieutenant," he continued, his eyes still locked with hers, honoring the rank she had held in the field, not the one she wore mopping floors. He then began to recite, slowly, deliberately, giving weight to every syllable, forcing the words into the consciousness of every civilian and soldier within earshot. "Awarded the Krzyż Walecznych, the Cross of Valor." He paused, letting the name of the prestigious Polish combat medal, given only for acts of extraordinary bravery performed under mortal threat, hang in the air. Huntington, standing frozen 5 feet back, looked utterly confused. "Polish? What is a janitor doing with the foreign medal of war?" Thorne's eyes moved to the next engraving. "Bronze Star, with V device for valor, 2nd award." A ripple of low murmuring went through the scattered infantry staff. 2 bronze stars with valor. That level of decoration wasn't given for logistical prowess or safe desk work. It was earned in blood and fire. "Purple Heart," Thorne continued, his voice softer now, acknowledging the cost of that valor. 2 awards. He looked directly at Huntington, who was now sweating profusely. the citrus scent of his cologne mixing disastrously with the odor of panic. "Do you know what this means, Sergeant?" Thorne's question was rhetorical, a prelude to judgment. "This is not laundry staff. This is not a grunt. This woman stood in the fire when your most elite operators scattered. She carried 2 men back on her back after her own team leader was vaporized, and she continued to fight the subsequent flanking maneuver with a dislocated shoulder for 20 minutes, providing suppressive fire when everyone else was pinned down." Thorne straightened, letting go of Silver's collar. He turned fully toward Huntington, his posture dominating. "You called her a nurse," Thorne said, his voice dropping again, vibrating with controlled rage. "You insulted her rank and demanded she move." Huntington stammered, "Sir, I didn't know. Her rank, she's listed as Cabo support staff." "Rank is a formality, Sergeant," Thorne clipped, stepping closer, forcing Huntington further back until the sergeant's spine hit the wire cage. "Service is everything. She outranks you in blood, commitment, and valor 1,000 times over." Thorne then performed the ultimate sacred act of respect. He reached up, unhooking the single-point sling from his own body armor. He carefully pulled the heavy, suppressed LMT MRPS, the custom weapon he relied on for life and death, the rifle that was an extension of his own will, off his chest. He walked past Huntington, ignoring the sergeant's wide, terrified eyes, and approached the janitorial cart. Cabo Silva still held the mop. Her face remained a mask of stone, but the tremor in her hands had stilled completely. Thorne gently placed the rifle across the cleaning cart, resting it across the handle of the mop bucket, treating the worn metal cart as if it were a high-grade armory table. It was the ultimate recognition, the passing of the primary weapon, signifying total trust and deference to her authority. It was a sign that, in his estimation, she was the highest-ranking, most capable person in the room. Thorne stepped back, giving her space. He looked at her, his eyes asking a single, silent question. "What is your order, Lieutenant?" The silence in the depot was absolute. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights seemed louder than any rifle fire. Cabo Silva looked down at the rifle, the polished, heavy machinery resting next to her industrial mop. A flicker of something crossed her face. Perhaps pain, perhaps recognition of a life she had forcefully discarded. She let go of the mop handle. Her left hand slowly reached out and touched the cold metal of the LMT's barrel, a brief, confirmatory contact. She didn't pick it up. She didn't need it. She then looked past Thorne, back towards Sergeant Huntington, who was now visibly shaking, recognizing the magnitude of his mistake. She didn't ask for the Type C solvent. She didn't demand an apology. She gave a single, clinical order, the voice of the old lieutenant returning sharp and precise. "Master Chief Thorne," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You and your team are on immediate asset retrieval. Sergeant Huntington is now classified as a critical disruption to base efficiency. He will immediately be reassigned to the primary waste management disposal unit, effective 1 hour from now until further notice." Huntington gasped, a pathetic, strangled sound. "You can't do that. I'm logistics. That's a general's order." Silva didn't even look at him. She looked at Thorne. "Ensure the transfer is clean," she ordered, "and secure me the Type C solvent, 3 liters, expedited requisition." Thorne snapped to attention, executing a perfect, razor-sharp salute that acknowledged both her current rank and the decorated authority of her past. "Understood, Lieutenant," Thorne confirmed. The 2 elite operators waiting by the door immediately moved. They didn't question the order or wait for Huntington to object further. They moved with the silent, overwhelming efficiency of people accustomed to enforcing rules that superseded standard military bureaucracy. They flanked Huntington, who attempted to protest. "I demand to see the base commander." One operator, without a word, reached out and grabbed Huntington's arm, not roughly, but with the non-negotiable grip of forged steel. Huntington yelped as he was efficiently ushered away from the supply cage. Silva watched them go, her face finally relaxing, the tension slowly draining away. She then turned her attention back to the cleaning cart. She reached into her uniform pocket, pulling out the worn requisition form she had tried to hand Huntington earlier. She looked at the signature on the bottom, a signature Huntington had dismissed. It was the signature of Major General Hayes, the base commander. Thorne approached the cage, grabbed the necessary canister of Type C solvent, and placed it on the cart next to the LMT rifle. He then looked at Silver. "It's an honor, Lieutenant," he murmured. "If you ever need anything at all, you just transmit the code." He gave her a quick, fractional nod. He reached for his rifle but stopped, looking down at the weapon resting on the cart. He smiled, a thin, functional expression devoid of humor. "Keep it for a few hours, Cabo," Thorne said, indicating the LMT. "It might get dirty where you're headed, but I trust you to keep it clean." He turned and strode out, his two operators having vanished into the facility with the efficiency of a stone dropping into a deep well, taking the hapless Sergeant Huntington with them. Silver was left alone in the depot, the hum of the lights, the scent of diesel, the vast metal shelving, and her cart. She reached down, her scarred left hand closing around the heavy, unfamiliar rifle. She lifted it briefly, the weight feeling instantly familiar. A ghost from a past life. She checked the chamber, noting the perfect tension of the spring and the pristine maintenance of the bore. A habit. She placed the rifle back down, reached for the new Type C solvent, and began to fill the mop bucket with the highly corrosive chemical, preparing to attack the contaminated floors. She picked up the mop handle, her grip firm and true. The Krzyż Walecznik remained hidden beneath her collar, but the authority it represented now resonated through the silent, cleansed atmosphere of the logistics depot. She had a job to do, and now she had the right tools for it. She pushed the cart forward, the wheels squeaking a final, victorious protest against the polished concrete. The floors needed cleaning, and Cabo Silva, the former lieutenant, the decorated hero, was finally going to ensure they were done right.